just, we are live.
We are live, but here, we got to do this first for the fans.
This is 2OF Entertainment.
Welcome to the Lost Dollar Business Club, where we talk about business, and not just business. We talk about what makes businesses go up and what makes businesses go down. If you're interested in businesses, this is where it is. We talk about the global economy. We talk about global politics. We talk about everything and anything business related that affects your life on a global scale as well as a local scale. And don't miss after the show, Lost and Found. Oh, we're here. Look at this.
We are live.
We have Mr. Guy Standing joining us today for the people on the podcast that can't see it. But before we start the show, I have to just say one thing. The New York Knicks finally won the playoff, and they didn't choke like they did last year, pussies. So thank God they won last week. It was better if they won in New York 2 nights ago, but they won in Detroit. So congratulations. Don't screw up the next set of series you have to play. So
good luck. Good luck with that. Yes. Good luck.
Yeah. I'm a Knicks fan, so disappointment I live for. So
yeah, that's
Knicks,
right.
Congratulations. Okay, there you go. There's my plug for the New York Knicks.
It's a good plug.
There you
go New York. That's right. Guy, where are you calling in from today, Guy? Where in the world are you now?
I'm at my home outside Geneva in a small village, and it's a beautiful day, beautiful blue sky. And I'm glad I'm not in Trump land, to be honest.
Okay.
Very differently from over in Europe, as you can imagine. So we're in strange times. We're in rather worrying times, to put it mildly.
Well, yeah, let's just dive right into it, because you recently wrote an article about maybe why you consider us being in worrying times, and part of that was, as you've been talking about many times, about the Precariat. And certain parties in the United States have not understood the Precariat concept nor addressed it. And some would say that Trump is a symptom, not the cause of what's going on in the United States. And that's probably deeply tied to what's going on with the Precariat class. And maybe you just want to fill us in on that and give us your quick definition of the Precariat for your viewers who haven't heard that phrase before.
Yeah, I wrote a book in 2011, which has changed my life as much as had an incredible impact. And it's called The Precariat, the New Dangerous Class. And on page 1, I said, if politicians and commentators don't understand and address the needs and aspirations of the Precariat, we will see the emergence of a political monster. And in the course of the book, I outlined the sort of characteristics that this political monster would bring. And the book has been translated into 25 languages. And basically, I've been asked to speak about the Precariat in well over 700 places, in about 49 countries, in 153 universities, different universities. It's extraordinary. And basically, to answer the question is that the Precariat is not like the old proletariat, the old industrial working class. It's describable in 3 dimensions. And we're getting some interrupting music.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's 3 dimensions.
Michael's still at a gentleman's club. He hasn't gotten home yet, so that's
no, it's like that. You get these background noises that disturb anyone's thoughts, right?
There you
but
go.
anyhow, the 3 dimensions are the following. The first is distinctive relations of production, and what that means in plain English is that they experience unstable, insecure labor. They don't have an occupational narrative or identity, and they don't have a sense of control of their time. They have to do a lot of work that doesn't get counted as work, and we can come back to that later because it's addressed in my new book. And this is the first mass class in history which has a level of education. Thank you. A level of education which is above the level of job they can expect to obtain at any time, right? That is a unique feature. So they suffer from a sort of status frustration, which is really, lack of dignity as well. That's the first dimension. Now, most commentators who've addressed my book around the world always focus on that dimension. And for me, that is actually the least distinctive. There's always been casualization, there's always been insecurity for workers. But the second dimension is that this is the first mass class that has had to rely almost entirely on money wages without access to non-wage benefits, paid holidays, paid medical leave, paid this, paid prospect of pensions, and so on. And it is also the first mass class which is systematically exploited by debt. The precariat are living on the edge of unsustainable debt all the time. That's their norm, if you like. And that, of course, creates tremendous economic insecurity, and their wages are declining in real terms, volatile, uncertain. Uncertainty is a characteristic of being in the precariat. And that leads to the third dimension, which for me is the most important. This is the first mass class in history that has been losing citizenship rights, the rights of being a citizen. They've been losing social rights. Benefits have been cut, made more conditional, and so on and so forth. They're losing cultural rights. They can't exist in cultures that they identify with. And they're losing civil rights. They can't get access to equal justice. They can't get because they can't afford it or it's denied them. And they're losing political rights because they don't see in the state any political party that represents their interests and needs and understands them. Now, those are the dimensions, but the really important outcome is that if you're in the precariat, you feel like a supplicant. You feel as if you have to ask for favors from everybody, be it landlords, employers, parents, spouses, friends, debt collectors. You have to be, and that is the original definition of precarious, going back to the Latin root of the word. It was defined as obtained by prayer. That's what it meant. Now, the important part of the precariat, as I said in my original two books on the subject, which was before the emergence of Trump in 2016, when Trump was elected, I had a deluge of emails from around the world, from all sorts of nationalities saying, your monster has arrived, right? That's what the messages were. And it came from all sorts of sources. Now, I said that the precariat is divided into three groups. If you were a Marxist, you could say that it's not yet a class for itself because it's internally divided. The first group I call the atavists. This is the lesser educated part. They're not deplorables, as a famous Hillary Clinton remark may sound as. They are people that don't have a lot of education, but they listen to the Trumps, or in Britain, the Nigel Farage, or the Marine Le Pen in France, or the Viktor Orban in Hungary, or the Modi in India. They listen to those people promising to bring back yesterday. Yesterday, MAGA, make America great again, make Britain great again. They are easily led to think that yesterday was better than today, and here are these people promising to bring back something that's actually mythical in many respects. That group will vote for the populist far right. The second group I call nostalgics. These are the migrants, whether you call them illegals or whatever, all these terrible words that are being used to describe all of us are migrants. I'm a migrant. If you look back to your own history, you will find most of your ancestors have been migrants. We're all migrants in some sense. For heaven's sake, let's grow up. But this group has no sense of home. They have no sense of home where they've come from, and they have no sense of home where they are. This group won't vote for the fascists, for the populists, but they're looking for a politics of paradise and they don't find it. So most of them are staying out of politics. They're not voting. They're disenfranchised. And the third group I call the progressives. And these are the young, mainly the young, who are told to go to university, told to go to college, and then you will have a future. They come out realizing they've got a lottery ticket and they don't have a future. And they're looking for a future. Now, this group is the group that I tend to be talking to around the world. And it's this group who basically say, Democrats, what are you offering us? You're not offering us anything. Trump doesn't speak to me. The old Labour Party, that doesn't speak to me. The Social Democrats in Europe doesn't speak to me. So they're not voting in any great numbers. So you had an election last year in the United States where your president, bless his little heart if he's got one, your president actually was elected with about 31% of the electorate supporting him. Only 31%, right? He doesn't have a mandate. And that was because 35%, no, or more than 35% of the electorate didn't vote at all. So we have a situation where we have a political vacuum on what broadly would be called the left, right? And unless the progressive side of politics and the commentariat, including all of us, unless we can relate with a new vocabulary, a new agenda, a new vision, a new narrative, we're going to see this continuing drift to an authoritarian form of fascism. And that's where we are today.
But do you think part of that is because the people, whether it's the president, Congress, Senate, whatever, in our country, forget that they're really just civil servants and they think they really are gods with a little g, if you will? See, I think they forget that we put them there technically, and they work for us. We pay their salary with our taxes. I think they forget that. I think that's part of the issue as well.
It is part of it, Stephen, but if you think about how American politics has gone during our lifetime, if you like, more and more you have to be either super wealthy or backed by super wealth.
Right.
I call what's emerged in the United States a plutarchy. It's ruled by the super wealthy in the interests of the super wealthy.
Right.
And you have, the richest man in the world running this incredibly disgusting doge. And you have these people, a cabinet where you're full of billionaires. Most of them are scary characters, with tattoos on their bodies and really strange tattoos. I mean, I don't mind nothing about
Oh, you mean the
tattoos.
head of the
They're really strange tattoos. And
Yeah.
and you have a situation where the super wealthy, the plutocrats, have captured democracy. We know what's happening. And they have an unholy alliance with the atavistic part of the Precariat. So they can mobilize a sort of class alliance between the elite that's gaining from rentier capitalism, which is the form of capitalism we've got today, and the disenchanted people in the Precariat who are not hearing any alternative message, alternative politics. And I think that we are in an era too where too many politicians are backed by too many think tanks. We're suffering from think tankitis, where you've got all of these young aspiring bureaucrats, as you were just describing them, jockeying for position to gradually move up the ladder and become a political candidate somewhere. And meanwhile, they serve some senator or congressman or whatever, and do their homework. But they're not real people in the sense, because they don't come grounded from their communities, their societies, their living ways, they're going through think tanks. And I've met so many of them, and they're sort of mechanical. We don't need robots. We've got them there. It is really a very worrying set of circumstances, because they're all on stepping stones trying to move through a system which is actually controlled by the Musks and the Peter Thiels that I describe in that article that Michael mentioned.
So, do you think this is a problem of the developed world? Because we have, is it Europe, the U.S., Canada, and maybe a few other places, or is this do you think it's a worldwide phenomenon?
Well, John, I'm convinced it's a worldwide phenomenon. I get quite a lot of invitations to speak in China, and the Chinese Precariat is enormous.
Yes.
And increasingly vocal and critical of its own regime, as well as international trends. And there are various names that have come up in the Chinese debate, like the ant tribe, suggesting people is running around like ants and so on. And there's a wonderful doctorate that was being done by a Chinese woman who took my framework and wrote about the Chinese Precariat, a beautiful dissertation. And I've also been asked to speak across Africa, across India, and Southeast Asia. I'm about to go out to Malaysia, where I've been invited to speak, and meeting the Prime Minister there, who wants to understand these phenomenon. So I think it's a global phenomenon. I certainly can tell by my emails that it is global. I get emails every day from various parts of the world, and I can never predict from which country the next lot is going to come from. So I think it is genuinely global.
Where do you see
It
the
takes
next
different
steps,
forms, but it's essentially the same.
Yeah.
So where do you see next steps then for this global, if you will, phenomenon? Are we going to go with the Elon Musks of the world buying elections globally, so the rich just basically, those five people, if you will, the Illuminati take over the world? Or is it, I keep saying, 7 billion people are going to take a picnic at some point and say, we've had enough?
I would put my answer in terms of Karl Polanyi's great book, The Great Transformation,
Okay.
which he wrote in 1944, was published in 1944. And his argument was that capitalism develops through phases. And in the 19th century, they moved to a free market, laissez-faire ideology, and finance became powerful. Britain was the leading capitalist country. Finance became more and more powerful, and inequalities rose and rose, and insecurities rose and rose, until, in his words, there was a crisis with a threat of the annihilation of civilization. And that, of course, was in the 1930s. And he said at that point, the crisis could either move to an authoritarian form of fascism or Bolshevism or some extremism of state controls in the interests of the affluent and others, or a new progressive agenda and vision comes into force. And his book was, he said basically the first stage was the shift to the far right. And then after the catastrophe of the Second World War, then the welfare states came into being as a response to that threat. Now, I hope that we can avoid the lesson of Polanyi, in the sense that we don't have another conflagration that will precede a progressive agenda. But we are at that crisis point We are at a point where we could have a rapid lurch to a form of neo-fascism. And I'm not using those terms lightly. I mean, what some of the things that Trump is doing against your universities, against your colleges, against protesters, against the rule of law, are truly in that direction. I've just been writing an article about one of his executive orders. He's issued 143 executive orders in his first 100 days, and all of them are undemocratic, and most of them are increasing inequalities, threatening the environment, threatening the status of women and people with disabilities. There's a familiarity in that emerging authoritarian direction. When you tell your universities that they must abide by the rules that I, the king, set, then you know you're in deep trouble, right? And we
Well,
are
if they want the money, if they want federal money, you got to abide by federal rules.
well, and yeah, but you don't alter the rules unilaterally. I mean, I don't think that if you've given grants to do research on climate change, then and to suddenly be told your grant is being taken away, I don't think that's justifiable under due process. I'm sorry, I don't think that's right. And I don't think it's right to threaten without evidence that your threats are valid. Okay. I would say that if a university is not abiding by federal rules, then you are 100% right. Okay. But you can't take action before showing that that is the case, or giving a university an opportunity to answer. And then if they do abide, still withhold money from them, like they've done with Columbia. Now, I'm not defending American universities. I've written a book recently, which hasn't come out yet, on the education commons. I don't like the direction that many universities in Britain and the United States have followed. I don't like what they're doing. But that doesn't justify unilateral action that just jettisons the law. And if somebody protests against speakers, that's been done through history. That's the norm. That's called freedom. But I mean, you can't persecute those who protest and allow people to say some disgraceful things, threatening things. There are rules, right? I believe in freedom of speech. I believe in the values of isagoria, which is the Greek term for equal right to speak and equal right to be heard. And we don't have respect for the latter part. So for me, that's a big area. But what Trump is doing is unilaterally not abiding by the US Constitution or by international law. He's just authorized deep sea mining when it's openly abandoning UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which says that no deep sea mining should start until there's a mining code on environmental protection and sharing of benefits. Now, that's under the international law that the United States helped to negotiate. And he issues a unilateral order saying, we're going to do it. I'm authorizing anywhere in the world. US mining companies can go deep sea mining. We know, every scientist I know says this is going to be catastrophic. But this man has done it. A unilateral executive order. Doesn't go through Congress. It really, this is the symptoms of a system drifting away from any sense of democracy to an authoritarian, despotic regime. And we've only seen the start of it. He keeps telling us we've only seen the start of it.
Have you? What do you think about when we talk about the evolution of where this came from? I mean, there was the Occupy Wall Street movement in 2011, right? And that was quickly stomped out and replaced by cultural warfare. as opposed to class warfare. At least that's what it seemed like in New York and the United States.
Yeah, yeah.
But do you think that now with the precariat and even worse financial position, that kind of movement could again point to the plutocracy or point to the oligarchs and say the divide is even greater and it's too great?
Well, I mean, I think that's a good opening set of questions, if you like, because I participated in a minor way in the Occupy Wall Street and Occupy movement in Europe as well. And I was very upset because one of the claimed virtues of people like my friend David Graeber, who's died, was that it would be leaderless and somehow, a moment from below. And it was classic, what I call primitive rebels phase. More people knew what they were against than knew what they were for instead,
Yes.
And I think what's been happening since 2011, which actually coincided with my book coming out, and I got a huge amount of coverage in Europe and so on. And since then, I think more people have come to realize that they don't feel sorry for themselves. They feel that they are members of an emerging class, and there's some dignity in that. There's some sense of direction that can be given. I'm not saying we're at a very advanced point in that emergence, but it's a big change that's been taking place, which I think is taking place in some countries much faster than others. And I've just had a friend staying with me who's come from Indonesia, and I gave a talk there, and we have surprising movements, members of parliament who are articulating a precariat agenda in countries like that and in Southeast Asia. And the leading candidate for the presidency of South Korea has an agenda based on the precariat, and I know him quite well. And he could well become president. So we could see a change taking place. I'm not everyday optimistic. I would say I get up on a Monday, I'm pretty depressed. Tuesday, I might be feeling better. Wednesday, I'm feeling euphoric, particularly if I've had a glass of something. And by Friday, I might be down again. But the thing is, we now have a greater sense of identity in the precariat. We now have genuinely millions of people who will proudly say, I'm part of the precariat. I'm part of the precariat. That's me.
I mean, how big of the labor force do you think globally the precariat represents these days?
Well, there are various estimates now because, of course, the definition is like the definition of a working class at all time. It's never that precise, but we have sort of estimates done by various people and institutes with different methodologies. I would put the proportions between 30 and 40%. Okay, who are in the precariat, and another 20% who feel that they could be in any time. And I find one of the things I gave a talk a couple of weeks ago, and it was typical.
Wow.
At the end, an elderly couple, not that elderly, but a couple, middle-aged couple, if you like, came down the aisle and said, can we have 2 copies of your book? And I said, yes, who do you want me to sign it to? And they said, it's for my son and my daughter, because I'm not part of the precariat, but my son and daughter are going to be, or are. That's what I get that reaction. I get that reaction an incredible amount of time. And therefore, potentially, we have support from people who are outside the precariat once they know what the hell it is. But I think that the sense of identity is spreading fast, and I think that's an important phase in moving to a new progressive politics, because your Democrat leaders, with respect, I think that's the word I should use, are dead men walking. The Labour leadership in Britain are dead men walking. And in the sense that intellectually and what they offer, I mean, would you rush to the turnstiles and want to fight for them? I don't think so.
No. So my question, I'm trying to think, if we go to, I think your thought of maybe a basic income, I'm trying to reconcile that with the position that we're in, in Europe and the US, where the let's just call it the financial state of those two places is, I would say, in a precarious or in a fragile state, because in the US we have 6 or 7% deficit of GDP, and it's really an unsustainable state. And so we're getting this, somewhat of a reaction with Trump and in other places of cutting the state, because we can't afford it anymore. So how are we going to get, how do we reconcile that with trying to address the needs of the precariat, given the resources that we have to change that?
I mean, I think the fiscal deficit and the budget deficit and all other deficits are contrived. If you slash taxes for the rich and the very rich, then of course your budget has problems, right? They've been slashing taxes and increasing the subsidies that are given to the plutocrats. Elon Musk has received something like $20 billion of federal money to enable him to build up Tesla and his various other things over the years. Those are subsidies, okay?
Sure.
If you give subsidies to the already plutocratic types, then of course you're going to have a deficit, because you're spending more than you need to in giving to the wealthy. That's been happening. Meanwhile, you're cutting benefits, calling it welfare, and somehow saying it's given to people who are scroungers or whatever, all the epithets that are thrown around. And you've got into a false logic, because then you suddenly say, oh, we don't have the money. Well, you don't have the money because of choices that have been made by people in power, right? So I think the first stage in all of this debate is to be saying, look, don't tell us we have a deficit. John Maynard Keynes, the most famous economist of the last century, said anything we really need, we can afford. It's a matter of priorities, okay? And as a matter of priorities, you can go through what your society, you, America, or us in Europe, what we want, what we need. And fundamentally, we have a terrifying tragedy unfolding as we're speaking and talking together, which is we have an epidemic of stress and mental disorders and suicides and deaths of despair from opioids and shortened life expectancy from cardiac and other problems that stem from insecurity. And we don't have a strategy for giving ordinary people security. And if we don't have economic security, then we cannot expect people to be mentally and physically responsible. They have to do whatever they need to do to survive, and they are losing mental IQ because of this insecurity. Now, this is the crisis of our age. This is the crisis of the precariat. And our politicians on the left and the right, the mainstream politicians, are not offering an agenda for that. But that is the biggest single crisis in our societies. The environmental thing is overriding all that, but the two combined are creating an existential crisis that we need young, vibrant, politically aware people to be mobilizing around. And I've advocated basic income for many, many years. And it's a remarkable fact that we now have something like 200 pilots and experiments ongoing at the moment. And we've had the results of many, some of which I've been involved in, from various countries, various types of countries, and they're showing wonderful effects. And most of all, an improvement in mental health. That's the biggest single finding that I would emphasize. Now, if you don't have a politics to give people basic security, you're unworthy to be in politics, in my view. This should be fundamental. And I don't believe that it's unaffordable. I believe in various forms of green and eco-fiscal policies. We can afford it easily. But taking away the subsidies given to the super wealthy and to the banks and so on is a first step. Only a first step, but it would be a very good first step.
Yeah.
But it goes back to my original statement, though. At some point, the United States is not going to do a basic income, so that's make believe. In China, they'll just kill people. So you have 7 billion people or 8 billion people. At some point, they're going to take a picnic because they're going to be like, we have nothing. We have no food. We have no water. We have no this. We have no that. I don't feel for Harvard at all because they put people in there that apparently need remedial math for 2+2. So some of the things that Trump does is okay. A lot of the other stuff, to your point, is very authoritarian, very 1930-ish. But at some point, doesn't the globe go enough? I mean, like Elon's bodyguards may get $1 million a year, but if 50,000 people want to tear you apart, I don't think they're going to stay for it. So doesn't the populate go, enough's enough? We need change. The guy who's in there now, the orange guy, thinks he is a king or a dictator. He thinks he's in there for life. So the Democrats are pussies. They're not going to do anything. In 2028 or 30, when he was supposed to leave, he's not leaving. Okay, what are they going to do? Nothing. Because it could be like, you're bad. You're a bad boy. He tried to overthrow the government in 2020. Nothing happened. Okay, you're a bad boy. So the king is here. He doesn't care about the little people. At some point, even the Trumpers now, or the MAGNA people, are like, we don't like what's going on because they don't realize what a tariff is, and now apparently they do. So now, do they go, enough's enough? Like, now we're going to have another 2020, but on a larger scale, because people are going to be like, I can't live. I can't do this. I can't do that. When you can't do food, water, medical health, blah, 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 blah. At some point, people are going to be like, yeah, we're going to take a picnic. And you can't stop, you say 300 million people in America if they decide to take a picnic. Well, the Americans are lazy, so 6 people. The rest of the world, maybe not so lazy. So what do you do? Or what do you think it's going to go or not go that way?
No, I mean, you're talking like the Monday of me, as it were. I mean, it's easy to get pessimistic and fatalistic.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's our prerogative as human beings. I think that we have to find the way through these things. This is an existential crisis of enormous proportions. None of us are littling that. We know that. I think that I'm slightly more optimistic that we will have something moving towards some form of basic income, even in the United States. I'm actually encouraged by the fact that enormous number of cities in the United States, their mayors and their politicians have come out in favor of a basic income in their city.
Right.
Over 50 US cities have committed to that. I'm enormously impressed by the fact that I've got records downstairs of nearly 100 experiments going around in various parts of the United States. Now, if I'd had this discussion with you 10 years ago, I would have said, dream on, dream on. That's beyond hope. Come on, forget it. United States? No, it won't happen. And yet it is happening. Okay. I'm not saying your pessimism is wrong. I'm saying that one should not give up hope. And I think that there are moves that are potentially exciting. We're seeing the same in Europe. We're seeing a lot of people coming out in favor. Opinion polls show that a majority are in favor. Opinion polls in the United States have shown quite a large proportion of people who would be Democratic in normal times supporting it. So I think, and in developing countries, we're seeing it become enormously popular, as I mentioned earlier. So, and we've just had a wonderful pilot in Wales, which is just completed. The results have not come out yet, but I know them. And I think that there is a general swell of interest. Google has just invited me to give a seminar in their London headquarters on the 14th of May.
Very nice.
I mean, I think one has to say, look, if something makes sense to you, to me, to you, whoever, then one should speak for it. Even if one can easily say, oh, the barriers to getting there are frightening, right? Daunting. And as long as people elect a Trump or in Britain a Farage or a Starmer, of course, we'll never get anywhere, okay? Right. But we have to be offering a politics of paradise, which is built around reducing inequalities. And my book on the politics of time is all about time inequalities, which I think is an overlooked set of issues. And giving people the most important thing in life, which is security, which gives health. And these are linked to reducing the need for public spending. I mean, if you have an unhealthy population, an indebted, chronically indebted population, this puts incredible strains on your public services, your infrastructure, and so on, which creates what John was talking about, or helps create the growth of this deficit and so on, because it's imposing extra spending demands. And I think we are at a point where if we look at what's happening from the perspective of the Precariat, then we can develop a transformational politics, which will be feasible, whether it's in the United States or Europe or in developing countries, for that matter, that will motivate and embolden people in the Precariat. That's why one of the things I talk about in that book, the final chapter, which is an allegorical chapter, imagining if a Precariat agenda came into being, people want a common. They want to share activities. They want to do volunteering. They want to be involved in their communities. They want to be citizens. At the moment, they're being denied that possibility. But there are many little changes which could alter that. I think one of the most important demands that someone like me as an economist can make is that we need to reconceptualize what we mean by work. If a woman looks after her elderly mother, it's not called work. If she looks after your elderly mother, it's called work. Mm. But actually, she can look after her elderly mother better than she could look after your elderly mother. Now, why is it that all care work done mainly by women, but also increasingly by men, is given a value of 0 in measures of our national income? 0, right? So if you increase care giving to your community or to your loved ones, national income goes down. It's incredible. Well, this is ridiculous. We need to say that the value of care, the value of community work, the value of working in a community garden, for example, where you're producing fresh fruit and vegetables, which you can either consume yourself or share in the community. Why shouldn't that be called work? It is work. If a Martian came down today and you said all of these things are not called work, but going to sit in a factory or a supermarket or a mall, it's called work, they would say, well, what's wrong with you, for heaven's sake? You know, why should be sitting in a supermarket tapping like this, or in an Amazon store going like this. Why should that be called work when if you're caring for someone who's dying or someone who's just come into life, it's not called work? I mean, let's be adults.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is that the concept of GDP was devised by Simon Kuznets and colleagues in New York in the 1930s as a measure of what was mobilizable for war.
Right.
And therefore, they said, women who have children, who are caring for children, are not mobilizable for war. So we give them a value of 0. Well, come on. That was bad then. It was wrong. As soon as war came, millions of American women were mobilized to help. We know that, right? But it was based on a sexist presumption. And we're still using that measure in the 21st century. So, I mean, that's a very simple thing. We could do it. We could give an imputed value, just as imputed rent is given to housing. We could alter the measure, and this would alter the perspective on what we think of as work and what we think of national income. And it would mean giving dignity to many forms of activity, which all of us here would regard as among the most valuable activities we can do. Very simple, but it's vitally important.
Well, maybe we'll get a political party that has, as we like to say in New York, chutzpah.
Yeah.
And they can actually go for all that, because the political parties now are, you have the Republicans, which is a cult, if I may. You have the
Yep.
Democrats, which I don't know what the hell they are. And you have everyone else.
Corporatists, yeah.
Corporatists, yeah. But I mean,
Or
they lay down.
yesterday's people.
Yeah, right. They lay down and die. I mean, we need somebody. Unfortunately, you need like the two guys out of Pennsylvania, the governor and the senator. They're the only two people that could literally stand up to Trump and tell him to go F himself, because that's what they would say normally anyway. And you need, unfortunately, you, you know, someone with balls. You need someone for balls that's going to run against him and go and call him out. The problem is you watch anything he does. If he says it's blue, his whole cabinet goes, it's blue. And the blonde chick, that's his press secretary, she came from North Korea. I'm sorry. I mean, like, whatever the emperor says is she's like, oh yes, Donnie's great, wonderful. I mean, it's
She's
just
frightening.
enough. And yeah, and then I listened to him with the reporters, like the other day on CNN. He goes, fake news, fake news. No, Mr. President, I hate to tell you this, you're fake news and you're full of shit. You're not a negotiator. You're nothing. China didn't blink. You're screwing up the world. We've lost $7 trillion in a market economy. You yourself have become very rich with your meme coins and your stable coins and all the deals you're doing. But the globe as a whole is in worse shape in your first 100 days. And that's the problem. But, anything he says, his cabinet's like, they're wonderful. So there's a problem there. And unfortunately, there's no price standing up to it.
Yeah, I know you've got to have different type of politicians to take on a bully, but I want to go back to something that Michael said, because I think there's some essential truth in what he said about universities. And I think one of the biggest single mistakes of the so-called left, the Democrats, and the so-called liberals in American universities, and it's the same in Britain, so I don't want to focus just on that, was to shift away from a class politics to an identity politics. And this woke stuff, and it was a gift to Trump and authoritarian types. And all of that became excessive, demeaning for too many people, demanding, and it was control stuff, and it was excessive. And the Democrats should understand that. And it created an opportunity for the bullies and the white boys, as it were, projecting a sense of men being reduced and demeaned and so on. It allowed a vacuum there, and I think that the left will only recover. And when I use the term left, I don't mean extreme left. I'm talking about any left of center, if you like. It's a short form. But the progressives have got to realize that you only get a progressive transformation if it's based on the interests and needs of the emerging mass class. And that means that they must understand the precariat. What I mentioned in that article that Michael mentioned was that I spent several days in the Bilderberg group meeting. I have to abide by Chatham House rule where you can't say who said what to whom. But I gave a talk on the precariat there, and this was in 2016 before the election of Trump. And the people there were all on the political right. I was very surprised to be invited, obviously. And they showed an understanding that was worrying to me, because they understood that the precariat was potentially mobilizable for the far right. I sat next to Peter Thiel all the time. I had a breakfast with Lindsey Graham, who wanted to know more details and wanted to take advantage of playing on the fears and so on. And I said to myself that this is worrying because it shows that they are understanding class politics. They're playing their version of class politics. I don't like it, but they're at least understanding class politics. And they did an alliance between the plutocrats and the atavistic part, as I mentioned earlier, of the precariat, whereas the left, the Democrats, have failed to do that. I mean, Biden's industrial policy was all about subsidies and, the old style manufacturing jobs. I'm sorry, it won't happen. Trump will not succeed, even though he's doing these draconian tariffs and so on. And there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with having people in other parts of the world doing demeaning jobs in factories. There's a beautiful video that's come out of China showing what happens if you put all the jobs that are done in factories in Southeast Asia back in the United States and had Americans doing it, and they wouldn't be able to do it, and they wouldn't want to. They wouldn't want to, and I wouldn't want them to either, because they're not exciting jobs. Okay? Why we have a jobs fetish? It's something that we need to escape from. For most of human history, jobs were things that people wanted to avoid. Now the left politicians want everybody to be in jobs. Why? So,
well, the robots will come soon, and then there won't be any jobs. Just the robots will do it.
Michael, I'm not sure that. I think what's happening with every technological revolution throughout history, more new jobs are created instead of old jobs. Okay, it's called the lump of labor fallacy. There are actually millions and millions of new jobs. There are more jobs today than at any time in history, and our technologies are more advanced than any time in history. So
Sure.
I don't think it's that. I think what's happening is that fewer and fewer jobs are paying a decent income and are capable of paying a decent income. And more jobs are of the type I describe in that book, which are both insecure, unstable, and don't have rights associated with them. I mean, I don't want my children, for example, to be stuck in 9-to-5 jobs doing the same boring thing for years and years. Why should we want to do that? I'd hate that. So I think we need to escape from it and say that forms of work where you develop your capabilities, your competencies, your humanity is something that we should work towards. And the precariat understand that. They want to work, but they don't necessarily want to be in stable, full-time, boring jobs. Well, good for them. That's exactly my dream of life too. I've never worked harder than since I've stopped having a job. I work 60 hours, but that's because I love what I'm doing. But more people want that. And we have to find the ways of creating it. And that is where we stand today. And don't forget, the biggest form of crisis for the so-called left is they developed welfare systems built on an old industrial model. And the old industrial model was that you had a probability of being unemployed, you had a probability of being sick, you had a probability of having an accident, you had a probability of becoming pregnant, etc. And you could design a social insurance system for that. All of those things. You can work out the probabilities and therefore design a social insurance. Today, we don't have that. We have a situation of chronic uncertainty. You don't know when you're going to be hit by a shock. You don't know how hard it's going to hit you. It's unknown unknowns in the famous Rumsfeld term.
Mm-hmm.
And that is different. You cannot have an insurance system. That's one of the fundamental reasons why we need to move to having a basic income of some sort to give people a floor of security. And that, for me, is a different way of measuring and imagining the challenges of our time. More and more jobs are going to be online. We know that. Millions and millions of jobs today are online. And the size of the American labor force or the British labor force is not measured by the number of workers in the United States or in Britain, because huge numbers of people in India and Africa and wherever are migrating their labor without migrating themselves. It's a remarkable modern phenomenon, and it's dragging down wages in the rich countries. You pick up a service line, as I had to yesterday, booking a flight, and you're talking to somebody, and I asked her, I said, "Where are you?" And she said, "I'm in Goa." I was meant to be talking to a London office, right? She was in Goa. And everybody knows that. More and more of these so-called jobs are being sliced up and put online. So millions of work days in the American labor force are actually being supplied by people outside the United States. They're not illegal migrants. They're not wanting to be migrants. They may be working in the Philippines or wherever it might be. And that alters the bargaining situation and the nature of our labor process, our production system. We need to say, what's wrong with that? Okay, what's wrong with that? We need to adapt to it, not try and be King Canute holding back technological and other waves. But we need a policy so that we give people the security and the sharing of the profits. That's why it's rentier capitalism. These technological jumps that are happening with AI and so on means that the Musks of the world are getting all the rents, whereas the people doing all the work are getting less and less. You know, a man has at one point $400 billion worth of wealth. 400 billion? I mean, this is disgusting and it shouldn't be accepted. And going back to your point, Stephen, which is that, at a certain point, people will take to the streets in the pitchforks. That worries some of the people in Silicon Valley, I tell you.
It worries my group of peers as well. And a lot of them are old money, and they always say, back in the day, you could show your wealth, but you took care of whether you made sure everybody had food and water, electric. They had things. Now, since the greed is good era, and all of a sudden we got into the late 90s, early 2000, it became, oh, look at me, screw you. And so they look at this as, 8 billion people are going to take a picnic. There's nowhere to go. And that's where their concern is like, so why aren't we making sure that everybody comes up with us? Granted, they don't need 12 houses and they don't need a Lamborghini. Why can't they just have a nice car, healthcare, food for their kids? And we don't worry about them. Then we can go do what we want to do. And the new people don't. And because of that, we have the problem that we have. And that's why I keep saying at some point, 8 billion people are going to take a picnic because only 500 or 600 million people are like comfortable. No, I use picnic as something different.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah,
I understand.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel that we're about to conclude. I feel that listening to the music, but I want to say that I think that we are at a beautiful point potentially where technologically and in terms of social policy, we have potential answers. I'm not being, utopian or idealistic in thinking that we could change directions from where we're going. And in changing directions, we don't know where the end point will be, but we will be rolling back. It's called in my book, I use the term, the Hegelian term, negation of the negation. We need, first of all, to dismantle the things that are causing everything to get worse. And therefore, one needs an agenda of transformation. That's why Biden was such a waste.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I'm sorry to say, Obama was also a waste. He had a great opportunity to, and he came with his useless, empty phrase, "Yes, we can." Well, we can what? What did he do? When,
Right.
whenever,
Right.
whenever the so-called left in Britain the same, they have their opportunities, but they tend to throw them away because they're so desperate to keep on office. So they try their opinion polls and discussion groups and all these things to get their middle class support, when in actual fact they'll only have a limited opportunity to be really transformational.
Yeah,
And
sounds like the
and
guy that's in office
fair
right now.
politicians that know that.
Sounds like the guy that's in the office right now. Got a limited amount of time to be a dictator until somebody says, "Yeah, it's time for you to go."
At least the boss, excuse me, the man understands that,
Yeah,
and he's running as fast as he can. 143 executive orders in 2 months, rather, sorry, no, 3
yeah.
months is ridiculous because they're not thought through. The one I mentioned earlier, it's 5 pages, and it misses out so many things. It's got so many errors in it because they didn't draft it properly or spend enough time thinking
But
the details.
they don't draft anything properly, and they don't do
No.
anything in detail. Just watch one of the press conferences with the chick from North Korea, and you'll
Yes.
see what I'm saying. So listen, we have to let Guy go
That's the
because
term
Guy,
you use, Steve.
yes, because Guy, it's on one of the other shows. Guy, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure. For the people, this is one of Guy's books. If you'd like to get it, it's a great book. I've read it several times and I enjoy it. Guy will be back in a few months if the world's still here, because we always love having Guy to give us the insight of what's going on. Have fun at Google, have fun in Indonesia. And hopefully when we see you in a few months, things will be, as we say, more better.
Let's hope so. Thank you very much, Michael, Steve, and John.
Thank you,
Pleasure.
Guy.
Yeah,
Good to see you,
good
our
talking
friend.
to you,
Cheers.
Guy.
Bye-bye.
All right. Always a
That was
great
Guy.
conversation.
Always love having Guy on. All right, let's pay a bill and then let's do some lost dollar. How's that?
Let's do it. That's right.
All right.
Get the freedom and the flexibility of remote work in the lucrative tech industry. Bend your life around the world. Bandicoot is the premier course and community for thriving in a remote tech career. Join the revolution today. Bandicoot.com, official partner of the Lost Dollar Business Club.
Ever wonder how millions vanish into thin air, or how a single dollar can make all the difference? Join us on Lost and Found, where we dive into the wild world of financial mysteries. From misplaced fortunes to unexpected windfalls, we unravel the stories of people, companies, organizations, and even governments who've lost and found millions. Lost and Found, because every dollar has a story.
Dun, dun, dun,
All right.
dun.
Every dollar. There's a lot of stories today.
There you
A
go.
lot of
I love when
stories in the economy.
I
Yeah.
love when Guy's a guest for one reason, because we don't have to do much. I love that because I'm like, just go. I like that because he like literally can talk for the hour. We could have a 3-hour show. I would love
Yeah,
it.
he's
I
got
don't know if the fans would love it,
great
but I
thoughts.
love it. Yeah, it's like Michael Collins is like, just go. And I like that fact that he can talk on and deep
It's
deep dive
important.
into
It's
it.
important that we have these
Important.
deep talks. Yeah.
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 All right. So we have a guest next week. We'll talk about, or in 2 weeks, we'll talk about him in a second. John, what's your lost and
Okay.
found? You had 168 hours to prepare. Go.
Yeah. Well, okay. There's two good ones.
Okay.
Well, the first one is that today, the Chinese are actually very quietly walking back some of the tariffs they put on U.S. imports. Something like 24% of the imports from the U.S., which is about $40 billion.
Okay.
obviously because these specific ones that I'm not sure what exactly they're exempting, but they're hurting their side of their economic system, shall we say. It's not a one-way street. It's hitting China too, and it's hitting their employment. So that's a you know dollar. I don't know if it's a dollar win for anybody here,
It
but
depends which side of the pond you're on, John.
yeah. So for the Chinese, it's maybe a dollar gain, and then maybe
Okay.
a dollar gain for the U.S. because they'll be able to export the stuff that the Chinese want, and they don't want to pay a
There you go.
tariff on. Yeah. The other one,
Yeah.
which I think is really interesting. In uh,
It's only an hour
Houston,
show, John.
yeah, in Houston, right? We've talked about this before. I think the Houston Independent School District, which is huge,
Right.
is facing a current deficit of 250 million. Right, the school
Wow.
district, yeah. But that didn't stop the superintendent, Mikey Miles, from accepting a bonus of $126,000 in April to supplement
Well, his income.
his $380,000 salary. You
Well,
see,
here's the problem with that, John, is that when you pick up every child in a Lamborghini,
yeah,
that's why you have $250 million budget problems. That's why.
yeah.
So
So
that's disgusting.
it's just amazing, and it's amazing that people keep voting or not taking action when this is your money. I mean, so for this year, the
Yeah.
current school deficit is expected to be 125 million. So
Nice.
250 last year,
Well,
125 this year, uh,
John, it's
and
only $400 million among friends. Stop it.
yeah.
So,
So so now they're going to have to be the district, approved the school board who votes for these idiots. It's just
yeah.
incredible, right? So they're going to have to dig in to their reserves and one-time savings to get out of this hole, I suppose. And they're going to fire 1,500 employees. Where these employees do and what they do is I don't know, beyond me, but um, so dollar
Interesting.
millions lost in Houston. Keep voting for the same fools that just I don't know, just don't
Oh,
know
here,
how to
let me hit you.
manage stuff.
Let me give you better news. Secret deals, foreign investment, presidential policy changes, the rise of the Trump crypto firm. There's an article in the New York Times that talks about World Liberty Financial has basically eviscerated the boundaries between private enterprise and government policies in ways precedent and unprecedented in modern history. Basically, it's everything we talked about earlier in the show. Trump is making billions with all his stuff. And now, because crypto is the new wild, wild west, all these crypto firms now are applying for banking licenses. So now you're not just going to have Chase and Wells Fargo and Northern Trust and Bank Mellon. You're going to have Binance Bank, this bank, and that bank. They're all getting approved under this administration for licensing. So welcome to the nearest. Here's your crypto bank coming around the corner. So there you go. And as the president and his family become richer and richer and richer, listen, I understand presidents make money. This is the most blatant form of corruption ever. So, everyone's talking about it. So I thought it was interesting. So it's a dollar found for Trump, and it's a dollar lost for basically the rest of the planet. There you go. Very interesting.
Well, we've got another dollar lost, this time for Apple, because there was a court order, a federal judge upheld a ruling saying that Apple cannot force App Store developers to go through their payment system. And
Okay.
that's the 25%, that's $100 billion almost in that 25% services there that is at risk for Apple, because Apple was charging 30%, taking a 30% cut of every App Store purchase.
Right.
And
Right.
now, at least for now, they're going to appeal it, obviously, but at least for now, app developers have the ability to go through other payment systems where maybe they're not paying Apple's 30% cut. So that's a big possible dollar loss for Apple, which generated $391 billion in revenue last year, and 100 billion of that, close to 100 billion of that, was through the App Store. So
And
there's a lot of
before we
money at
leave,
stake.
that is a dollar loss. Before we leave, let me just give you the breaking news coming across the wire. Trump renews threat to revoke Harvard's tax exempt status. Just came across the wire, kids. So there you go. Live news on the show. Anyway, we hope you've enjoyed the show. We hope you enjoyed our guest. In 2 weeks, we have
David D. Molfetta from the NextGov publishing house,
Oh,
covering
David's
the
back.
federal government. David is back, and it's going to
Yay,
be
we like
great.
David. David will be good. And our David's
right.
coming back next Friday, as far as I know. He's back from his naked Tahitian boy oil body rub and his yacht. So we'll hear all about that.
Or not want to hear about that.
Or
Yeah.
not want to hear about that. But we have video. We can put that up on OnlyFans. Thank you for listening and watching. If you were live, if not, we broadcast it on Saturday mornings. Get it wherever you get your podcast, or you can see us here on YouTube. Thank you for everybody. Don't forget to subscribe and like, and we will be back next Friday on another Lost Dollar Business Club. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. Cheers.
All right. Yeah.
And we are
All right.
done. Oh, no.
All right.